This is Young, Black, and, a podcast bringing light to the Black artist experience in Charlotte and beyond. We're your hosts, Bre and Tracie.
Hi, Tracie.
Hi.
How are you? How is your... What's today?
I think it's Wednesday.
I think it's Tuesday. We have rehearsal yesterday.
Yeah.
It's Tuesday.
Oh my God. It's Tuesday.
It's Tuesday. One day closer to school.
When does school start?
First day of school is August 27th, but I think we go back. Hot dog. We start teacher work days on August 16th. No! Help me, Holy Ghost.
Today, we have a bit of a different episode than what we usually do. Because usually we're interviewing people and we will resume that next week. But this week, it's just you and me, Bre.
It's just us.
And we want to talk about character development.
Yeah.
And I think this is a really cool conversation to have and might be helpful to anybody who's interested in developing a character.
Yeah. Yeah, I think character development is one of the most important processes in the entire process of rehearsing, because if you don't understand your character, if you don't understand the context, if you don't understand why the playwright wrote this particular thing at this particular time, knowing all of that, I think it's so beneficial if you do it before you start rehearsal, so that when you go into rehearsal, you kind of have an understanding of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think script analysis and character development is paramount for any role that you do.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to quickly also point out, if you didn't already gather, that Bre is a teacher. What do you teach, Bre?
I teach theater.
Yeah. Yay. And you have what degree? From where?
I have a Bachelor's of Arts in Theater from Fayetteville State University.
Okay.
Class of 2012. And then I have a Master's of Fine Arts from Hollins University in playwriting. So I specifically studied writing plays and writing scripts.
And so I had you point that out because you have education to back up all the things that you are about to share.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to be really helpful to this conversation, because I didn't go to college for acting or theater or anything like that. Everything that I've learned has been through, I do study acting with Lon Baumgartner at FAST, which is Film Actor Studio here in Charlotte. And if you don't know who Lon is, then you're missing out, because he's amazing.
Yeah.
And I've learned so much from him, and I continue to learn with him. And I've also, I've read books and everything, but then a lot of what I'm coming to this conversation with is experience. So I think that between the two of us, we are going to have some pretty good information to share.
Yeah. What process would you say that you go through for your character development?
I always start out with really good intentions. There's all these questions that you ask yourself about your character, or you ask about the character or the script. I'm always like, I'm going to analyze it and I'm going to do all of this. And then I start to try and figure things out too early. That's one thing I've noticed about myself.
Mm. What do you mean by figure things out too early?
I'm always like, well, I think this is who, and I'll speak about wife number 2, which is the character I'm playing in Eclipsed. I go into the process early thinking, well, this is what her childhood was like, and this is what she is thinking about this and that and whatever. And I think this time it was more obvious than it ever has been that I need to give myself the time and freedom to understand her more in the context of the other characters. Because every day that we have rehearsal, I see something new. Every time I read the script, I see something new about wife number 2. Even yesterday, I was reading through one particular monologue, and I've read it and heard it a million times. But for some reason, yesterday, it hit me really hard what she was saying. And I actually started crying. I had to stop and grieve for Mayma. And then I stopped, I stepped away from the script for a while. Then when I was in the car driving to rehearsal, I had another thought about that monologue and about Mayma, and I started crying on the way to rehearsal. I came to too many conclusions too early. So I guess what I'm trying to say after all that is I don't feel like I have necessarily a concrete, these are the 3 steps that I would do to develop a character. I learn the character as I learn the character. I don't think that made any sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. You learn as you continue to go through. And that makes sense because it was one day we were working on one particular scene with wife number 1, wife number 3, and Rita, which is my character. And I'm sorry, my voice sounds super weird. It's not fully 100% back from camp, which is fine. It's totally fine. But if you hear me sound like a 12-year-old boy, that's why. But it was this one day we were rehearsing, and there's one line that I never, ever understood until I said it. It wasn't just me waiting and anticipating to say the line. It was literally me reacting. And the way that I reacted gave me so much context just for the scene. Because I never understood why Rita was asking the questions that she asks in that scene. And so when I reacted in a natural way, I was like, oh, that's what she's doing. And so when you say, you learn your character as you learn your character, it makes perfect sense. Like, you learn as you're going through it, as you learn more about the script, as you learn more about what your character is saying, you learn, you just keep going.
Well, I have the same question for you, especially with you being a teacher and this being part of your curriculum. What do you teach your students to do?
Yeah, so one of the units that I teach is script analysis for the actor's perspective. So many people will do script analysis. So you have your director who's going to analyze the script. You're going to have your actors who's going to analyze your script. You're going to have your set designer, your costume designer. Everybody's going to analyze it. However, what they're looking at is going to be completely different. And so in this particular unit that I teach them, we go through identifying facts and inferences. And of course, inferences are kind of like the predictions that you're going to make. Mm-hmm. And then another part of it is identifying certain questions in the scene, which for what I teach them, it's 5. So each day we go over one of the 5 questions. And one of them is, what does your character says? Plain and simple. Mm-hmm. What does your character do? What does other people in the scene say about your character? What does the playwright says in the stage directions? And sometimes that's a little difficult because, like in our play, Danai doesn't give a lot of stage directions.
Right.
As an actor, I love that because it allows me to explore. As a writer, I'm the opposite. I give stage directions, not a lot. I think it depends on the play, because some of my plays are very stage direction heavy, and then some are it's just non-existent. But as an actor, yes, I love that. And then one of the final questions that we ask is, how does your character treat others? And these are just very basic script analysis questions for students. And each day we tackle a question, but we do it scene by scene, because different things happen in different scenes, and you got to figure out. And this is something that Dee asks us all the time: what's happening in this scene?
Yeah,
not the whole play,
right?
But in this scene. And so we break it down scene by scene with these questions. Do you have any other questions that you go through, or anything else that you do for your character development? Because you say each time it's a little different for you.
I think mostly it's just different because it's still something that I'm still learning. I think I mentioned before that I've only really been acting in a professional capacity, I guess, since 2013. So the first play I ever did, there was no character development. It was just, let me memorize these lines. So each play I've just learned more and more, or each thing that I've done, I've learned more and more. And of course, being in acting class, I'm continuing to learn. So I think the reason that each time is different is just because I don't know what the hell I'm doing or haven't. I feel better about it now. But this time, one of the things that I have found to be most helpful is to continue to read the script and continue to evaluate my objectives and strategies. I think one of the most important things that you can do in developing your character and analyzing the script is to determine what you want and how you're going to get it.
Yeah.
And sometimes just like you were saying, where you said something in a certain way and it caused you to understand things so differently, I feel like that's sort of what I was saying, where I come in and I feel like, okay, this is the objective and this is the strategy. And I try to do that early. And then I discover later on that I was completely off. It's not that I was off, but it's like I didn't know myself, and by myself, I mean my character. I didn't know myself well enough to determine what my objective really was and the way I was really going to go after it. So there were some lines that I was saying pretty much the same way every time when I had the script in my hand. And then yesterday we were completely off book.
Mm-hmm.
That was exciting. But not having the book in my hand showed me some different strategies.
Yeah.
Like my eyes were open because I didn't have them buried in my script. And so the way I was saying things changed because what I wanted from the other person in the scene changed and how I was going to get it changed. Mm-hmm. And I like giving myself that kind of leeway to not be married to, well, I said I was going to do this and whatever. Like, I feel like this is more realistic and natural. Mm-hmm. Because when you come into a conversation, you know what you want out of that conversation. You don't necessarily know how you're going to try to get it until you're in the conversation.
Right.
I'm enjoying this part of the process in a way that I feel like I haven't before. Just letting it happen as it happens and not trying to control it and manufacture it as much.
That makes sense. And see, the way that I approach character development, I'm so detailed. And that's just because I'm usually wearing a playwright's hat. Mm-hmm. It's been such a long time since I've worn an actor's hat. Mm-hmm. And so all the tools that I'm using for this particular piece, a lot of it I learned in graduate school, studying playwright. I mean, we took acting classes. I'm not going to sit here and say everything we did was writing about a script. No. But a lot of the tools that I use are the very things that they gave us to write the script with. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, what type of objectives do you want these characters to have?
Right.
And so objectives, stakes, and obstacles are something that I look at as a playwright. Mm-hmm. And so I took that going into this show and try to identify those for Rita as well. Like, what is her objectives? Like, what does she want? One moment, her objectives is the women. Mm-hmm. But by the end of the scene, it might be different. Right. She might have a completely different objective. And then I think that's what I love so much about the scene that we have together. Mm-hmm. Because the way that we see Rita up until this point is her one objective. And then all of a sudden, it's just like, aha.
Right.
There's another one.
Yep.
But it took me a minute to realize, like, that second objective that she had is her drive. Uh-huh. It's like a hidden objective that not everybody realizes. And honestly, nobody else really, really knows besides Mema. She's the only one because we don't talk about it at all. So she's the only one who pulls out that other objective and the stakes for her and the obstacles that she's facing. Right. And I'm like, dang, this kind of changes everything. Now it's like she's on the front now. Not the front, but like she's on blast kind of.
Yeah. And that's one of the things about Mema that I discovered early on and have found that I still feel this way, like, it's been consistent, is that Mema is one of these people who knows how to get at people. Like, she's a manipulator. I hate to use that word.
Yeah.
Like, some people can see beneath the surface and use it to help and to protect and whatever. I think that Mema sees beneath the surface and she uses it to protect herself. But the bottom line with Mema is that she is one of these people who can see maybe what other people can't.
Yeah.
How she chooses to use that superpower is, well, that's her responsibility.
Right.
That's part of the reason that you got to see the play. And that's something about Mema that I don't necessarily feel is true about me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm one of these people that's like, hey, I feel like I'm a dog. I just love everybody. I trust everybody. Like, people come in and I wag my tail. I'm like, hello, you're trustworthy. And, then you get hurt and it's like, oh, you're not. And I don't usually have that ability to discern right away. I just think that everybody's like me. And when I walk into a room, I am just me. Yeah. I don't try to hide anything. I don't try to, I don't know. I'm honest. I work hard. And I assume everybody's going to be that way. And sometimes they're not. And I kind of wish that I had a little bit of that superpower that Mema has, where she's like, oh, I see you.
Yeah. Well, two things. One, I definitely don't think Mema is a manipulator. I think she's an opportunist.
There you go.
And I think there's a difference between a manipulator and an opportunist, because an opportunist, they're really focused on anything that benefits them.
Right.
And I don't think an opportunist realize what they do and the decisions that they make, how it really affects other people. More so it's about protecting themselves, whereas a manipulator knows.
Right. Gotcha.
If you're in a relationship with a guy and basically he cuss you out, go off on you, say all these terrible things to you, and then want to turn around and say, oh, everything I just said, I didn't mean it. I love you. You're manipulating because you're saying those particular things to get that person back. You know exactly what you're doing. You know exactly what you said. But I think an opportunist don't necessarily realize or see the decisions that they make, even though it's to protect themselves and even though it's to help them, how it could hurt somebody else. I feel like they're kind of blinded by that, blinded by their protection and their own well-being.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, because I felt like manipulator was the wrong word, but I was like, I don't know what the right word is. And you're right. She's an opportunist. Yeah. That's perfect.
I don't want to say I see myself in Mayma, but then I kind of do. In a sense where I can see through BS. I can tell within the first 30 seconds whether you're somebody I'm gonna get along with or not. And I do believe that's a superpower because it saved me from so much hurt.
Cool. I wish I could. I just assume everyone's got the best intentions. Not quite. It doesn't quite work that way.
No. What I'll do is I assume that you're looking out for yourself. And I can't judge you for looking out for yourself. I can't do that. What else? Anything else? Any other questions you ask yourself?
I think I've mostly talked about what I do. I think the only other thing is there's the objectives, there's the strategies, and then also important is, and I think you said this, the obstacles, like what's standing in the way of getting what you want and how are you going to get around that. So those are things that I don't necessarily put those labels on them, but those are things that I have found become more clear the more that I am becoming a character. And side note, having all of this time to work on this character in this play, it's been amazing because I feel like I wouldn't have been able to find all of the gold that I'm finding if I didn't have the time that I have.
Yeah. So we're going on 3 months and we still got
a month.
A month before we open. Like,
yay.
I mean, and that's the one thing that I love about, like, even as a playwright myself, and I do some directing, I feel like, man, this might be a process that I have to allow my shows to go through because at Fayetteville State, we did it in 6 to 8 weeks.
Yep.
And most people do it in 6 to 8 weeks.
Yep.
And we just got off book. We had to be off book this past Sunday.
Yeah.
But it's not like a scary off book. No, it's like we know what's happening in the scene and we know what to do. It's just like we might miss a couple of sentences or, a couple of pieces of dialogue. Whereas in 6 to 8 weeks, and then to be off book, like, shoot, you just got like 2 weeks to be off book. Some people stressed out about having to be off book. I coasted because I was like, we've gone through this script so much. Now, granted, I am only in 4 scenes. But even so, like, the scenes that I really didn't know were the scenes that I use the Line Learner app for. It's just having so much time. And like now that the book is out of our hands, I feel like I can actually work on her physically now. But I've said from the very beginning, I feel like this script is such a crutch because the moment I feel uncomfortable and the moment I feel insecure, the first thing I'm going to do is bury my head into that script. So, and it takes me out physically. But like right now, I'm looking at the points that I make when I'm doing my script analysis. But one of the final things at the very bottom is voice, body, and costume. And I wrote down body is also affected by the environment. And as we're sitting here talking, I'm like, that makes so much sense now because now I get to physically work on her and I don't have to worry about, but like your body is also affected by your environment. What?
Yep, it's true. There's a book that I read called The Actor and the Target. Declan something. I don't know. I think he's British. But that book has been so brilliant. I've learned so much. And I think that having read that book before I came into this process was very, very effective. And I highly recommend it. But that's one of the things he talks about is how the space affects you. And that's something that I never thought about in any other play that I did. I was reading the book when I was doing A Time to Kill at Theater Charlotte, and that was the first time I ever started thinking about how the space affects the character. Yeah. Does the space set you free? Do you have limitations in that space? What are those limitations and why? And so now, especially, this is set in Liberia in the time of war, and the house that these wives live in is destroyed, essentially. And then there's the open space outside of it. And there's war happening all up in this place. And there's rape happening all up in this place. It's crazy. So how does that space affect me?
Yeah.
As our set gets built, that's something that I'm looking forward to discovering even more as we get in the space and get to allow it to impose itself upon us without scripts in our hands.
Past few months, it's been a lot of background research understanding. Now I feel like it's the perfect time to get through this physically. Thinking about my character, one of the things that I started thinking about since I've looked at this body is also affected by environment is the women peacemakers were on foot.
Mm-hmm.
They were on foot. They weren't walking from city to city, from village to village, from compound to compound. They weren't in cars.
Mm-hmm.
These women were on foot. How does that affect your body? Like, I haven't even thought about that.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, okay, now it's time to physically start working, on this character. But then I think it's very important to look at the history and look at the social context.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at it because, like, something I mentioned before we started recording was A Doll's House. Why is it so significant that she leaves at the end? If you think about the time period, women didn't leave their husbands.
Yep.
Their husbands were their everything. Like, that's your livelihood. That's your money. That's your survival. Nora was like, bye. We read a small scene with the kids, probably 8th grader, I think. And they didn't understand. They was like, well, she should have left and if this was happening and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, y'all, like, that's like what, the late 1800s, early 1900s?
Where was she going to go? What kind of job was she
Women
gonna get?
weren't really working at this point. Like, their jobs was inside the house.
Right.
That's why it's like, well, her deciding to leave. I'm sorry. If you have not ever seen nor read A Doll's House, well, spoiler alert, she leaves at the end. It's just like knowing and understanding the significance and why that's significant. You need to understand what is happening, where it's happening, when it's happening. And so to think about what's going on in Liberia, the limitations of that war.
In the process of developing our characters and learning about the play, in the very beginning, our director, D. Abdullah, had us do some things. And I don't know about you, Bre, but for me, it was a unique experience to have a director who asked us to do the things that she asked us to do. Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so she gave us homework.
At our first rehearsal, Dee gave us some questions, and she expected us all to have those questions answered before we met or by the time we met the second time.
Yeah.
19 questions.
19 character development questions. And I think that these questions, like, I will always use these questions.
Yeah, they
when
were
it comes
amazing.
to, developing my character. Developing my character, because one of the first questions she asked is, how is your character described by the author? Like, no, and this is something that I feel like is so important, is knowing why the playwright wrote this and knowing what they're trying to get across is so, so important. But
I remember getting the questions and thinking, oh yeah, I'll bust these out.
Nope.
The questions just got deeper and more intricate the further into the questions that you got. And I think it took us, all of us, it took us the entire week. And we kept texting each other and messaging each other like, are y'all done? Because I'm not done. No, I'm not done. I'm
10.
nowhere. Right. What question are you on? I'm still on number 8. Y'all are on 10? It was
Dang,
deep.
I'm a slacker.
Right. It was deep. Why don't you go ahead and read off the questions?
Yeah.
Just in case anyone would like to use these.
What does the character tell you about herself? What does other characters tell you about your character? What is not said about your character? How do your character feel about herself? How do each of the other characters feel about your character? What is your character's relationship with other characters? What is your character's relationship with the objects in her space? Which part of me feel like I need to go through these questions again.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I was going to let you finish and be like, I think I'm going to answer these questions again. Yeah.
What is your character's feeling about her space? List how your character sees the power structure of the people and the space. How does the character change during the course of the play? Where does the other character see themselves in that power structure? Where does the other character see your character in that structure? Do your character change during the course of the play? Where in the script does it support your thinking? What are your character's hopes, dreams, and desires? Who validates your character, and who does your character want validation from? What is your character's objectives, and does it change or stay the same? What is your character's obstacles? Does it change or stay the same? How do you feel about your character, and what do you think your character will think about you?
I was thinking about that last question number 19. I was thinking about that yesterday when I was all up in the script and all in my feelings about Mayma. Because I was grieving for her as a child to have to see and feel what she saw and felt. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, Mayma, I'm so sorry. Mm-hmm. And then I thought about that question. What does your character think about you? And I could just hear her going, shut up, bitch. Like, because she's out here trying to live and survive. And she ain't here for my pity,
I was like, these women they couldn't stand it.
I know.
They like, if y'all don't go away.
Okay.
But I just feel like they're so strong.
They're so strong.
I could not imagine being in that environment, mm-hmm. being in that war. Like, I could not imagine it at all. And people always want to say, this is what I would do. Oh, my kids say it all the time. And I'm talking about my students. Like when we talk about, because we do a study of Black theater, mm-hmm. and we go through all the way from minstrelsy to going through civil rights. There's different time periods in Black arts. But one of the things that we talk about is the effects of like A Raisin in the Sun coming out when it did. Mm-hmm. All those plays when they came out, why they were such monumental plays for that time era. And then we go through civil rights. And the first thing my kids always want to sit here and say is, man, if I lived in, I would have did all this to them white people, and I would have did this and I would have did that. I said, absolutely no. You wouldn't have, because this is the thing. When our grandparents and great-grandparents, those generations, when they were being raised, they were raised on what to do, how to do it in the face of white people at that time period. How to respect them, to say yes sir, no sir, to not look them in the eye. You go to your water fountain, you're going to go to your bathroom, you're going to go to the restaurants that are for you, or go in the entrances that you are trained to go through because you were raised for that time period. So to sit here and say what you would have done,
mm-hmm. no one would know. Say.
But there's no way. I know for a fact, I do not believe I would have survived that war. Knowing your era, knowing that time period.
Yeah, you do. And I think that coming into any character work, whatever person that you are going to be portraying, you have to be able to, I think, have an understanding of human nature enough to know. If you're coming into a character and you're looking at that character as separate from yourself, then you're going to have trouble. Mm-hmm. I really feel like the first thing you have to do is identify. You have to find that part of yourself that could do exactly what that character is doing. Yeah. That can be uncomfortable. That can be very uncomfortable. I mean, when you all see the play and you see the things that wife number 2, that Mayma does, I can understand why it would be uncomfortable for someone in my shoes to feel like they would need to distance themselves from who Mayma is and what she does. But I can't. I feel like, how can you be an actor and close the door between the person that you are becoming on that stage and the person that you are right now? And I would like to wish and hope that I would do things differently than Mayma. If I take it back to the very foundation, what did she feel? And where did she feel like she had no choice? I would hope that my feeling of no choice would be different from hers. But I know that I have felt what she feels. Powerlessness and helplessness. I have felt those things. Yeah. So if I take it down to that very foundation, then that's something that she and I have in common, and I can build on that. Instead of shutting the door on how uncomfortable and how scary that feels, to acknowledge that perhaps if I was in her shoes, in that country, seeing what she saw and feeling what she felt, perhaps I would do the same thing. Mm-hmm. That's a scary thought, but I think it's idealistic to say that I'm not capable of murder. I think all of us are capable of murder. Nature. That might be controversial, but that's what I think. Mm-hmm. And I think if you delude yourself that you're not capable of something just because it's horrible, then that makes you even more capable of it. Yeah. Because you're not aware of your own darkness. Yeah. If you're aware of your darkness, then you can navigate it. Yeah. If you're not even aware that it's there, then how can you face it? How can you face yourself? How can you rise above it.
Yeah. I think it's important to always remember each second of their day was so focused on just surviving. And a lot of times people were forced to make choices, to make those life or death decisions to survive. I don't even want to think about that possibility because I don't know what I would have chosen.
Right.
Like, I can't sit here. Like, I know what darkness is in me. I've faced it. I've seen it. And I know how to tame it. However, I've never seen that level of fear.
Right.
Or face that level of fear to where I would have to make that type of decision. Those people are just, they're so strong.
Yeah. I'm going back to that book really quick, The Actor and the Target. One of the things he says is that, you know, it's not enough for your character to want something or feel like when people analyze a character and say, why did they choose da-da-da-da-da? His premise is, no, the character feels they don't have a choice. There is no choice being made. The choices have been withdrawn until there's nothing left but this thing that they are doing.
Right.
And in real life, that's what it feels like. It's really easy to, what is it they call it in sports? Monday morning quarterback or whatever, where you look at the game and you're analyzing yesterday's game and saying what they should have, could have, and would have done, you know? Hindsight is 20/20.
Yeah.
In the moment, you can't.
And sometimes you don't have the luxury of time.
That's a luxury.
Yeah, to sit here and say, red pill or blue pill.
Right.
You ain't got time to sit here and analyze what the possibility of each pill is going to be. You just got to take one and go.
And a script, any story that's being told in a forum, whether that be on television or on a stage, it's hyperlife. They're just bringing together the parts of the story that matter, right? And so with hyperlife comes removing niceties like, what should I do? You don't get that. And in those hyperlife moments of our real lives, you don't get that. But I can at the very least say that for most of us, we've never had to live through a war that is devastating and it's right in front of your face. Unless you're a soldier.
Like, I mean, to even think about that home front, like, when was the last time we faced a war on our soil?
Exactly.
Like, we're talking about the Civil War.
Right.
Unless you're a soldier in the military and you go somewhere else and you face war, that's a completely different story.
Right.
But to sit here and, like, our people, our civilians in this country, to sit here and they like fleeing from your home and taking whatever that you can and then have to come back and try to rebuild. This country hasn't seen that since the Civil War.
So if you have anything that you would like to contribute to the conversation, if you have any thoughts or any pointers or anything like that, then why don't you go ahead and email us. We are at youngblackandtb, that's T as in Tracie and B as in Bre, at gmail.com. And, you know, who knows, maybe we will read your question or your comments in a future episode. It was nice chatting with you, Bre.
It was wonderful chatting with you, Tracie.
Young, Black, and Cultured. Young, Black, and Cultured is a segment we use to highlight up-and-coming events and productions of Black artists in Charlotte.
Shakespeare Carolina presents Top Dog Underdog, written by Susan Laurie Parks, a dark comic fable that's an urban retelling of Cain and Abel. The show opens Thursday, July 26th and runs through August 4th at Duke Energy Theater. Tickets available at CarolinaTix, that's TIX.org.
And make sure you support young Black local actor Iris DeWitt in Steel Magnolias at Davidson Community Players through July 29th. Tickets at davidsonCommunityPlayers.org. Want to support Young Black and financially? Visit our Patreon page at Patreon, that's patreon.com/youngblackand. No spaces, and is spelled out. And if you're interested in sponsoring an episode, email us at youngblackandtb, that's T as in Tracie and B as in Bre, at gmail.com. Again, that's youngblackandtb at gmail.com. Thanks for the love, you guys.
That's all for this episode of Young, Black, and. If you've enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a review on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you. Also follow us on Instagram at youngblack_and, that's AND_. or follow us on Facebook at youngblackand. If you have an upcoming event or you'd like for us to spotlight a Black artist, message us on Facebook or on Instagram. Bye!